Hey guys, welcome back to Face with Tarrance Weaver. I'm Tarrance, and today I have a very exciting chapter to read to you. This chapter I'm going to talk about my mom. If anyone knows me, I was a mama's boy, and my mom was everything to me. She meant the world to me. She was my sun, she was my moon, she was every part of me, my stars. I loved her so much. And in the process of life, I realized that I knew her only from one perspective, and that was from the point of view of being my mom. I never knew her as anything else. And as we go along through life, that's what we tend to do. We tend to focus on people and use them in the slot that they're in and never seeing them as the person that they can be or that they are to other people. So within this chapter called Borrowed Time, I pour out my heart. I learn her story. I see it from her perspective. And I want to invite you guys to this reading with me and have a better understanding of my mom. But before we get into that, I want to read the preface to this chapter, and it's called Finding Borrowed Time. Within this next chapter, it was the hardest chapter for me to write. I can remember sitting at the computer staring at the blank screen, and this inner soft voice came to me saying, "Write about life from your mom's point of view." It took me sitting there and staring at the computer screen for about 30 minutes before the Holy Spirit started guiding me into the direction that was needed. I then made a couple of phone calls to a few key family members to research my mom's life. And to be honest, I was blown away with the information that was shared with me. I had lived with my mom my whole entire life until she died and never truly knew who she was. Well, I knew part of her, but never really realized how little until this chapter. She was such an amazing, strong woman, and she carried her yoke, the family's burdens, her pain, all of that on her shoulders. As my protector and provider, she had an image to uphold, and she did that very well. It kind of puts me in mind of Moses in the book of Exodus, chapter 17, verse 8 through 13. The Amalekites came to attack the Israelites at Rephidim. Moses said to Joshua, "Choose some of our men and go fight the Amalekites. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hands." Joshua fought the Amalekites as Moses had ordered, and Moses, Aaron, and Hur went to the top of the hills. As long as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning, but whenever he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning. When Moses' hands grew tired, they took a stone and put it up under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur held his hands up, one on one side and one on the other, so that his hands would remain steady until sunset. So Joshua overcame the Amalekites' army with the sword. Just like with Moses, some burdens may have seemed impossible to carry, and we may need help just as Aaron and Hur has helped the world. I thank God for my mom's support system when things may have gotten too heavy for her to bear. I thank God for them picking her up and helping her win all the battles that she couldn't face alone and remaining steady until her final sunset. Borrowed time. As I lay in this hospital bed and my life passes slowly before my eyes, I can't help but question some of the choices that I have made in my life. I have to tussle with the reality and theory of death being the ending or beginning of my life. I have seen this road from a distance, but God's blessings have always detoured me back to the highway of life. Lord knows that I am so afraid right now, and I would give anything to be in the healthy state of mind, body, and soul. I have heard that from the moment that a person is born into this sinful world, they are destined to die. It is what you do in between those two moments that really matter. I think that I have coped with life the best way that I know how. Ultimately, I know that it's up to me to decide whether I go to heaven or hell. In John 14, 1 through 5, it states, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God. Believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, would I have not told you that I am going there to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. You know the way to the place where I am going." I know that Jesus was trying to comfort his disciples, clear up any questions they had, and ease any fears that would emerge. Maybe it worked for them, but it's not working for me.
I am full of questions. I am full of fear. It's easy to believe when your reality is not standing face to face with death. Now my whole life boils down to one question. Do I believe that Jesus died for my sins? To be honest, I am not sure what I believe now that I am in my final hour. Here's what I know. I know that life has been hard for me. I have made a lot of mistakes in life, and because of those choices, I may end up in hell. I know that it's written in Ephesians 2:8-9, the NIV version, for it is by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves, it is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. Yes, but what does that truly mean? If that is true, why are there people still going to hell? Maybe I should have spent more time in church. Lord, please help me. I don't want to die just yet, and I really don't want to go to hell. My parents have always pressed God in my heart, but just like the prodigal son, I had to experience life for myself. I know that my faith and how much of what I believe in His Word is the key to unlock the gates of heaven. I have been honest here that my mother's faith was strong and my faith was weak throughout life. Life has given me enough wisdom to understand the difference between the young and the old souls in life. So, through your aging, wear and tear, and your trials and tribulations evolves your spectrum of faith. At the young age of 46, I am not sure that my faith is where it should be. My adolescent, pure, uneventful faith grew into a wavering faith that usually ended with the question, why? Yes, why was I dealt this hand in life? Why does my faith have to be tested the older I grow? Why am I so afraid to die? I have stood beside death and at times showed affection and love towards it. I have been running from it my whole life, and I know I am just plain tired. I am tired of running, fighting, breathing, and living. I am tired of all the physical hurts, mental pains, and all of the spiritual losses. I think that the souls that we have encountered in life that preceded us in death make it a warm and welcoming place within our heart. I am Ida Mae Weaver, and this is my legacy. My son Tarrance is going to shed some light on my story from my point of view. I made a couple of bad choices in my life that I wouldn't necessarily call mistakes. My family has always stood beside me throughout my encounters. I can remember the first time that I became pregnant with my oldest son, Cornell, LaShawn Hall. Although he was conceived out of puppy love, he was my first child and the first grandchild introduced to our family. My second child was a blessing to me also. His name was Paul, and I knew that he was a special child from the moment I gave birth to him. I can recall my midwife coaching me through the birthing process. With a grin on her face from ear to ear, she looked into my eyes and said, "Ida, we have us another fine little baby boy." As she held him up to the light so I could see him, as I laid my head back and closed my eyes to catch my breath, my midwife laid Paul on his back so that she could clean him up. I will never forget the next words that came out of her mouth. She exclaimed, "Oh my, that is the big bad sign." As I opened my eyes, I asked her, "What is a bad sign?" I was told that the moment she placed Paul on his back, he flipped over onto his stomach all by himself. The midwife said that this is a sign that a baby will not live long. Well, as days faded into months, my family's love for Paul grew. There was truly something very different about Paul that we all sensed. He seemed to have the intelligence and the strength of a 1-year-old from the moment he was born. I had never seen anything like it in my whole life. My midwife's words were starting to fade off into my mind, like a sunset in the sky. Plus, I was constantly reminded that this baby was a gift from heaven. One day I can remember sitting on the couch in the living room with my sister. We heard a knock at the door, and neither one of us had clothes on that strangers could see us in. So we both ran to our separate rooms to put more appropriate attire. The moment that I walked into the room, I could tell something was wrong. I walked through the threshold of my room at the end of the hall, and something pulled me over to my baby. I touched him in hopes of calming this intuition inside of me, but he did not respond. It was then that I knew. Slowly, I reached down as I held my breath, and my heart started rapidly pounding to see if he was okay. I could feel that his body was lifeless. His little arms fell and were suspended in the air between my hands. As I held his head in my left hand and his diapered butt in my right hand, the questions filled my head as emotion started to overflow from my body. Did the midwife curse my baby? What did I do wrong for my baby to deserve this? It is because Paul was made outside of wedlock. Suddenly, I turned my back and ran into the living room screaming, "My baby! My baby!" The insurance man was knocking at the door. He was now standing in the living room. He could see that I was in a state of panic, so he took my baby and called the paramedics. But it was already too late. Paul died at 7 months from crib death, or what is now known as sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS. According to the Free Dictionary by Farlix, SIDS is considered death from cessation of breathing in a seemingly healthy infant, almost always during sleep. I can't help but to think that if I had been in that room with him, maybe I could have saved him. Did I overlook the warning signs that he was sick? Lord, why did you let my baby die? As I held Paul, I kissed Paul, and I laid Paul to rest. That was my first encounter with death. Well, a couple of months went by, and I can recall that at times my teenage friends and I would walk around and pick up cigarette butts off the ground and smoke what little remained of them. Smoking was a nervous habit that I developed over the years to help cope with my nerves. I didn't have a job at the time, so I couldn't afford my own packs. To be honest, I wasn't old enough to purchase them either. I can recall the first time that my dad confronted me about my habit and where I was getting my supply of smokes. In my family, honesty was a key to survival in our household. Since my father was a military man, our household was ran by a different code. My loving parents would never ask me a question that they didn't already know the answer to. So, the truth was the only avenue to freedom. My mom's favorite line was, "Girl, don't you lie to me. I brought you in this world and I will take you out of it." So, of course, the fear of my mom's wrath made me gravitate closer to my dad. I knew he wouldn't like it, but I told my dad the truth. My dad made me deal with me because he knew that I would still smoke, and I was his little angel. He made me a promise that if I would stop smoking the cigarettes off the ground, he would buy me a pack every time he received a paycheck. The only rule to this agreement was that I was never to be caught smoking any cigarettes by either him or my mom. It was a sign of respect. But hey, out of sight and out of mind was a phrase that I would learn to love. I respected my father's wishes, and he honored his deal. I had the best father in the world. It was like I was the son that he never had, since they produced 6 children and we were all girls. We had a really special relationship, and I have to admit that I can't help but smile when I think about the fact that my sisters had to have been a little bit jealous of our relationship. But they had to just get over it. During my healing process, I met the love of my life, Wallace Weaver. Within a year of my son dying, I was married and working on starting a new family. Things were making a turn towards the good in my life now. We would love each other as much as a teenage couple could love. Within our first year of being married, I gave birth to Wallace Weaver Jr., WJ. The first year of his life was the scariest for me. I was so afraid that this would be a repeat of what happened to Paul. At the age of 17, my dad let me drive everywhere for him. He would always sit in the back so that I would feel like I was in control and was the only one in the car. That is until I would look in the rearview mirror and see a grin on his face and his hat tilted slightly to the right as I drove with confidence. A couple of months passed by, and Dad and I were on our way home from visiting my uncles and cousins on his side of the family. As I made a left turn off of Red Oak Drive and pulled into our driveway, I remember hearing this tapping or shaking noise behind me. As I looked in my rearview mirror, I noticed that he was shaking and foaming from the mouth. As I screamed, "Dad, stop, stop, stop it!" He didn't respond. I threw the car in park and exited from the driver door and ran inside of the house screaming for help. My mom came running out hollering, Lance, are you okay?" When she opened the right side of the passenger's door, she noticed his eyes as they rolled in the back of his head. She screamed, "No, no!" I wasn't sure what was happening, but she turned and screamed at me to get in the car and drive. "Drive to the hospital as fast as you can." As I ran down to the car to the driver's side and opened the door, my heart was racing. I can recall trying to get the key in the ignition, but my hands were shaking too bad. My nerves were shot and only getting worse as the seconds passed. My mom yelled, "Baby, calm down and just drive," in between her pleading with my dad to stay with her. I took a deep breath, and I did just that. So I pulled out of the driveway with the desire for high speeds and fear of what was happening. I glanced in my rearview mirror, and I could see the panic on my mother's face as she cradled my father's head, and the tears were streaming down her face. She kept saying, "Baby, stay here. Don't leave me. Stay here." She then took her hand and started wiping the foam away from his mouth. We were only about a mile away from the house and still had about 7 miles before we would make it to the hospital, when I heard a sound that I will never forget and know that I will someday make. It was a sound that I had heard over 1,000,000 times throughout my lifetime and never gave two thoughts about it. It was a sound that collectively changed our crying into weeping. Genesis 2:7 says, "Then the Lord God formed a man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being." I never thought about how that would sound as the breath of life entered into Adam's nostrils, but I would never forget how it sounded as it exited my dad's mouth. He took one last breath and silence filtered through the car as his body movement ceased, and we could hear it leave his body. Immediately, my mom's prayers turned into screams. I felt as if I was punched in the gut. I watched in the mirror as the backseat of the car where my dad once sat as a proud chauffeured father turned into an ambulance. My mother tried to revive him, finally transforming him into a coroner's car. Once we arrived at the hospital, they only confirmed what we already known by giving it a label. The label was called stroke at the brain. This was a hard pill for me to swallow, to know that when I looked in my rearview mirror, his grin would not be staring back at me. I have to admit that my dad used to keep a bottle of bootleg moonshine or gin in the stash for himself whenever he wanted to indulge. When he would finish the bottle and walk away, I would always search for a little bit of a corner of alcohol left in the bottom of the bottle. He was my world, and the influence of a parent carries a lot of weight. So now I find myself here without my father and such hurt and pain in my heart. Months passed by, and I received a job working at the local mill here in town. I found myself surrounded by women that were older than me and who were experts at drinking. I noticed that when I was with them, my hurts and sorrows went away. I now know that it wasn't because of their company that I felt at ease, but the comforts of the spirits that I was drinking. As a family, we would learn to live together without our dad. On the first couple of holidays, there was always an empty seat at the end of the table that would honor our love for him. Our bond as sisters grew into a substance consistent to that of superglue. I love my sisters with all of my heart. No one or nothing will ever come between us, and we will always be together. So I thought. I can remember my supervisor walking up to me one hot summer day while I was working at the mill. I was told that I needed to go home because there was a family emergency. As I pulled into the yard, there were people everywhere. I parked the car and proceeded to walk up towards the group of trailers on my mother's property where all of my sisters lived. I could see my sisters screaming and crying. Emotions started to rise up in my body as I searched the crowd and started mentally checking off the people that I saw. It was a process of elimination so that I could determine who the commotion was about. It seems that everyone was staring at my sister, Edna's trailer. Edna is the second of the oldest sisters, so now I am about 20 feet away from her front door. As I made my way through the crowd, people were beginning to whisper, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. My eyes were now fixed on my sisters and my mom as they consoled one another. Just from their demeanors, and as they displayed love for one another and a reflection of their tears, I started to cry also, puzzled by the fact that I could see Edna in that circle. I wondered, why are we standing in front of her trailer? Step after step narrowed the distance between their knowledge and my curiosity. With about 5 steps remaining, my husband grabbed me from the side and just hugged me as he whispered in my ear, something that made my knees buckle from beneath me. Wallace told me that Mary, my third to the youngest sister, was stabbed to death over 40 times by her husband, Stanley, of another one of my sisters, Emma. Due to the jealousy in his heart, Stanley went to question Mary about Emma's whereabouts and if she was truly at school. Of course, with that being Mary's sister, she did what any sister would have done, and she stood her ground as she stated the facts. Emma was in school. She respected the love for her sister. Edna and my mom later told me the details of them discovering Mary's body. When we walked inside of that trailer, they saw Mary standing on her back to them, slumped over the kitchen sink. They were devastated by the amount of blood that was present throughout the kitchen, which created an eerie, dark environment since the curtains were closed, and the smell of blood was in the air. They continued walking slowly towards the kitchen as a team. Since Mary wasn't responding to their questions, our mom slowly reached out her hands to touch Mary on the arm to see if she was okay. It was our mom's touch that unlocked Mary's love in her legs as they gave way, and she fell to the floor with wounds all over her body. Even though Stanley stabbed her over 40 times, which included stab wounds to her face, neck, and chest areas, Mary still had the courage, power, and love to stand back up on her feet after he had left her to die as a symbol of her love for Emma. She held true to the bond that we are all made sisters to one another. I am so thankful for my husband paying close attention to the details as the killer returned to the crime scene inquiring about what all of the commotion was about. Stanley was acting really surprised to hear the details of the murder scene as Wallace explained it to him. It was then that Wallace looked down and said, "Hey man, you have blood on your shoes." Stanley then disappeared into the trailer that was on the same lot, where he attempted to clean the blood off. Wallace reported the information to the detectives. Once they approached the trailer to inquire about the evidence, Stanley decided to just admit to the crime. We were all family, so how could he commit such a crime? He was our brother-in-law and one of our closest friends. We were all just sitting at the same table together earlier this week. I never sat down and talked to anyone about how I felt losing 3 very important people in my life in a short amount of time. I really felt as if I needed to talk to someone about this, maybe even a counselor, but I didn't want my sisters to think that I was crazy. I mean, no one else had talked to anyone about getting help, so I just learned to live with the hurt and pain. I felt as if each one of those deaths took a fourth of my heart. Now, how was I supposed to divide up the last fourth among my marriage, kids, and family? I was mentally tired. This life seemed so unfair. Years have passed by and I feel as though I'm just running through the emotions of life. The stress of my losses and the trials of my marriage drove my husband and me apart. How was I supposed to give love to a family when I don't have enough love inside of me to supply? Plus, I just found out from my doctor that I was pregnant again with another baby. I can't remember walking into the doctor's office for the second visit without my husband and talking to the doctor about possibly getting rid of this baby or possibly putting him up for adoption. My doctor told me that I would be making a big mistake and that he had a feeling about this baby boy. He told me, "This one will be your mama's boy, and he will stand by you until the end." With a renewed outlook on life, I stood up and looked in the mirror with thoughts of walking into this pregnancy with a failing marriage, 2 sons, and a future mama's boy. The time arrived for me to endure this pregnancy and face my worst fears again. I gave birth to my 4th child, James Tarrance Weaver. For the first year, I was terrified and would not leave Tarrance alone in the room. It took a while for my fears to fade, but I learned to manage. A couple of years after our new addition to the family, our marriage took a turn for the worse. We decided to separate and go our own ways. Now, I had 3 children that I was supposed to take care of until they were old enough to make their own decisions. I vowed to scrape up what little love I could and spread it among my kids, even though it was only coming from 1/4 of my heart, and it would spread very thin. Nothing in my life was going as planned, and I felt like I was the black sheep of the family. I would soon find myself working 2 to 3 jobs trying to make ends meet. When I would get off of work, at times I would need a drink to relax my nerves and help me make it from day to day. Trust me, my mom constantly told me to stop drinking, but she had no clue how I felt inside. It's not affecting my family or job, so I don't see the big deal. Well, as the years passed by, I found myself facing another tragedy in my life. As you have already read, WJ was shot and killed at a young age. In my mind, I am constantly haunted by my son's last words. "Remember to take care of my kids if I don't make it back." I could have saved my son's life had I stopped him from leaving. So, there went the final 1/4 of my heart. All of my kids were out of my house except Tarrance, who was my freshman in high school now. I felt I couldn't go on. The pain inside was just hurting too bad. My soul was longing to be on the other side with the familiar souls. I never took a gun and placed it to my head, but I frequently had a glass to my lips. Almost 4 years have passed by, and the hurt and pain have now intensified to unbearable levels. The alcohol does not numb the pain anymore. When I look at my own reflection, I see a woman who is dying. On the inside, I can feel death as it's taking over within. I can feel it within every breath that I take. I know that my body is losing the battle as the poison is being pumped through my heart into my veins to defile my other organs. I can feel my organs throughout my body start to struggle as they fight a losing battle. I can feel frequent muscle spasms in my stomach and chest area as my muscle tissues weaken. Every step reminds me that I am getting closer and closer to my demise as they become fewer from the lack of oxygen in my lungs. There's this constant smell that I can only smell that lets me know that I am rotting from the inside out as my once white eyes start to take on a yellowish tint. The decisions that I have made in my life have led me to my final hour in life. The irony in this situation is that I spent my whole life running from death, just to have life pick me up and turn me around and convince me to run towards death with an open heart. As I lie here in this hospital bed where I began early in the chapter, I lie in the bed with my eyes closed and a ventilator pinning me to this world. I can hear my son's voice as he kneels on both knees beside my bed and prays for my life and pleads for my soul. I would do anything to feel his touch, but my sense of touch has already left me. With only minutes of my life left on this earth, my son's prayers soothe my soul as he starts by saying, Father,
Please save my
please
mother,
save my
because I don't know
mother,
how to live without her.
because I don't
I know
know
that I'm
how
young,
to live without
but I'll truly be in debt to you the rest of my life. Do as you will with my life, Father, but just spare hers. Father, do you hear me? I'll give my life over to you just as long as you keep hers. Take my life. Father, allow her to live. Was not the blood of my brother enough to cover our sins? She didn't deserve the hurt and the pain that she's had to suffer. Please allow her to hear my prayers, Father. Please turn thy ears towards my lips, Father.
Deep down inside of his heart, Tarrance seemed to think that I didn't love him enough to live for him. I wish I could console his tears as he opens his heart up over a lifeless body to our loving Father. I'm screaming from within this body, but my lips aren't moving. Tarrance, I love you more than life itself. I swear, baby, that our destinies will cross again. On that day, I will tell you and show you what I no longer have the strength and desire to tell you at this moment. Please, baby, don't turn your back on our Father and think that he didn't answer your prayers, because this is my prayer that he is granting. I will be heading to a better place where there will be no more hurt and no more pain. Lord, I know that my only wish was to see him graduate from high school. Now, since that doesn't seem possible because it's January and I will not survive the next 5 months, please grant me this last request. Let me use my last breath to tell him that I love him one last time. I can hear Tarrance get up from his knees as the doctor walks over to his side and begins to talk to him. The doctor begins to tell him that, Wait, doctor, please, don't leave that burden on this son. You have no clue what a decision of this magnitude will do to his life. Father, please stop them. Please give me the strength to say something or take my life before he has to take this place. My father never granted me that last request before Tarrance was faced with the decision to unplug my ventilator to end my life. I could hear Tarrance say, do what needs to be done, as he walked out of the hospital room with a half of a heart and out of my life forever. Shortly after that, the rest of my family members approached the side of my hospital bed, one by one, and said their goodbyes before the doctor pulled the plug. I can remember my life flashing before me as my family started to cry off in the distance to my right as I gave my life back to God. I would soon join my loved ones as calmness fell over my body. Ida
Mae Weaver died at 46 years young on Thursday, January 22nd, 1998. another day that'd be etched in my brain forever. I received a different perspective from my mom after walking in her shoes as I wrote this chapter. Towards the end of this chapter, as my emotions and tears got the best of me, I felt such guilt and shame for not considering what life must have been like for her. It is true that I was only a teenager at that time, and my parents were still invincible at that age. All I wanted her to do was to stop drinking, but now I understand her encounters in life. I only looked at it from one perspective, her role as being my mother. I never took into consideration that she was a grieving mother, a wounded daughter, or a hurting sister, and that she was suffering as an ex-wife. I finally realized that drinking was a milder road or avenues that she could have taken. My mom was right about me exiting the room with half of a heart. 1/4 of my heart left with Double J, and the other 4th left with her. From the start of this book until now, God has allowed my journey of writing this book to be a healing process to my soul. God has poured his wisdom into my soul and given me a new outlook on life. I now know that my mom had 1/4 of her heart, that there was a void that took up 3/4 of her heart, and she was using gin to refill that void. Wisdom has shown me that I should have learned from her mistakes and to look to God to replenish my heart. I will admit that at one point in time I was very broken, and that I am still broken on the inside. I was following the only pattern that I knew at that time, which was called tradition. And now that I've stepped out on faith and allowed my eyes to fall upon the Lord, a restoration process has started to take place in my life. My heart is no longer half full, but has grown to 3/4 of its full potential. I know that part of this took place due to God's unchanging love, and I can see it through the overflowing of this love through my heart. It is weird how families can walk through the same life but have such different views on it. It is at that moment in time that each of them will make a decision that will alter the DNA of the family tree. A blessing, a tradition, or what seems like a curse will evolve based off one's choices in life. But people are so quick to judge a person's habits without searching for that life-altering truth. I would love how Bishop Jones would walk up to a stranger and say, "Hey, tell me your story." Because everyone has a story to tell regarding their endeavors in life. In my family, each member has chosen a path based on the choices that they've made in life. And each choice made has affected the paths of everyone in their close circles. My parents' path evolved into a divided family, and Double J's choices to leave the house on the final night, and my mom's choices to drown her sorrows. And my choice, my very own choice, to understand and respect their choices as I share their legacies in hopes of saving more lives. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed this chapter, Borrowed Time. If you can, please share, like, follow us, and God bless.